Fantasy Football Happy Hour with Matthew Berry, served by Applebee's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour. That was Coach Andy Reid dressed up as Santa Claus after the Chiefs blowout win on Christmas Day. I'm your host, of course, here, Connor Rogers, alongside my guys, Matthew Berry, Lawrence Jackson in the house as well. Fellas, Matthew, we'll start with you. Good to see you in the NBC decorated bunker. I love the upgrade.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you know what? The NBC pop-up shop, the NBC Sports pop-up shop had this plush peacock, and I said, I'm going to be having to do a few shows from the bunker here in Florida, so I might as well grab that and spruce it up. I currently have 7 other people in this house, and the closet is the only place I can find to do this show and be have at least some semblance of quiet. A bunch of kids running around. So yeah, it's an NBC-inspired bunker.
Lawrence, what about you, man? What's going on? I know you had a big hosting duty, but it seems like all is quiet now.
Yeah. I made it through, had about 20 people at the crib yesterday for Christmas. And Connor, I was talking to you about it, and I was kind of like, oh, man, what I'm going to do, man? But, man, it was good. It was great. Actually, just before we came on air here, my oldest daughter that goes to Seton Hall, she was here. So like Matthew, I'm in a house, full of people, but not as many as Matthew got. But, it's all good. It's all love around, man.
That's right, and it's a good transition because we got love-hate today. Listen, we took Christmas Day off. We are back on the grind here, guys. We got love-hate championship week edition. We're also going to go through the Christmas games. We had 2 blowouts there, but we're still going to break down the biggest fantasy impacts. And it's Thursday Night Football already. The football doesn't stop, so we got best bets for you coming up at the end of the show. But let's jump right into the running backs here, and we're going to start with Jonathan Taylor, who is coming off a massive week after disappointing that previous week. We got to hear from Jonathan Taylor on the bounce back after his tough week 15.
For me, like I said, something like that last week that's something that's not common for me, and a mishap, something that it'll never happen again. But we just need to get the win. We got to keep that goal in sight. It's a chance. It's slim, but it's a chance.
As you approach the goal line, were you thinking at all, just hold on to it? Just hold on to it.
No.
It looked like he had some fun with it, though.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I already had predetermined in my mind, no, next time I'm going all the way in the tunnel, for sure.
And always optimistic and positive, Jonathan Taylor, and we're optimistic about him this week, Matthew. He cracks your top 10 because he's got the Giants, who have given up at least 17.8 fantasy points to a running back in 5 of their past 6 games. We know how bad the Giants have been overall, but Matthew, they've been especially bad to running backs in fantasy.
Well, yeah, bad or good, depends on which way you look at it. Since week 10, no team in the NFL gives up more rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs than the New York Football Giants. So Jonathan Taylor, who should get a heavy workload in a game in which they're favored, a game in which they need, as Jonathan Taylor, friend of the podcast, referenced in that clip that we just played. Listen, they need this win. They're going to be playing all out, and the best way that the Colts move the ball is on the ground, whether it's with Anthony Richardson's legs or Jonathan Taylor's leg. I think both will be successful against the Giants. Remember, teams that face the Giants, again, since week 10, teams that face the Giants are averaging a league-high 28.5 running back rushes per game. And then, of course, Richardson is such a threat with his legs. Taylor is a top 7 running back for me this week.
Yeah, Lawrence, you got to love not only, obviously, the matchup, but we should expect serious volume in this game where the Giants have just fallen behind so early in every game the last couple weeks.
Yeah, and that's actually what I talked about on Fantasy Football pregame. His over-under for rushing yards is 86.5. And I said, Jonathan Taylor's going to get there either way, by the way that he did it or by volume. 3 straight games with at least 22 carries and 95 rushing yards. So this particular game, he just went off, but the game before that, when he dropped the ball, 107 yards. Game before that, 96 yards. So now he's actually adding the touchdowns to it. So this has been kind of going on for a few games now for Jonathan Taylor. And like Matthew said, now going up against the Giants team who just had Bijan Robinson last week. He was successful against them. So you can only imagine what Jonathan Taylor will be able to do with a dual threat quarterback like Anthony Richardson next to him. So Jonathan Taylor, you're feeling great about this.
JT, RB7. Right behind him is Zach Charbonnet at RB8. And Lawrence, we were talking about volume. No Kenneth Walker. He's been ruled out for Thursday Night Football against the Bears. Charbonnet, he's got 4 starts this year. We know Walker generally is a guy that gets beat up and misses time. In those 4 starts for Charbonnet, he's averaging almost 20 touches and a 15% target share. He's another guy that fits the bill, not only with volume, but a really friendly matchup.
Yeah, it's always, and it's always great for your fantasy prospects when Zach Charbonnet is going to be the lead back for the Seahawks, and now he's going up against the Bears team. They have a lot less to play for than the Seahawks. Matter of fact, the Bears are only playing for pride at this point, and since week 11, they're allowing 177 scrimmage yards per game to running back. So this is a good spot for Zach Charbonnet, and to be honest, Connor and Matthew, they were starting to kind of make this backfield more of a, 1-2 punch. But now without Kenneth Walker again out of the lineup, with him out the lineup, you got to love Charbonnet. So I love him on the love list this week.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's sometimes it's not that hard, right? And we love the Seahawks for allowing us to have this, so many backfields are confusing. This one isn't. When Ken Walker is out, you start Zach Charbonnet. It's that simple. I think you'd start him regardless, but especially against a Bears team that since week 11 is allowing 177 scrimmage yards per game to opposing running backs. During that stretch, they also give the second most fantasy points to opposing running backs. The Bears 26th against the run over the last 4 weeks. They're Seattle. I was surprised by this, Connor. Seattle's only a 4-point favorite in this one. I thought they might be a little bit more, but I think that given the shakiness, honestly, Geno has not looked great. And this is a short week on the road at Chicago. Geno has made some ill-timed interceptions and turnovers recently. This is the game the Seahawks really need to keep their playoff hopes alive. I think on the road at Chicago in a short week, I think they go conservative. I don't think they want Geno throwing it all over the place, especially given that they're favored. So I think a massive workload is due for Zach Charbonnet tonight. As you mentioned, he's my RB8 tonight.
Yeah, it's a good call out, Matthew. This one opened up at 3.5, which I really, really liked. It's already moved now to 4.5 on DraftKings, so we'll kind of see where this one lands. I would imagine some of that is Geno Smith's knee injury and a matchup that, a place to play where you never know how things can go throwing the ball. So we'll see, but I'm with you all the way. This is a huge spot for Charbonnet, and if you've stashed him or if he's been an insurance back for you to Kenneth Walker, you're in a really, really good spot. Another guy that makes the list just outside the top 10 is Bucky Irving. Matthew, this is somebody you touted all the way going back to August as, hey, if you could be patient, eventually this will be Bucky Irving's backfield. Not only has that happened, but you look at the matchup on championship weekend, Carolina, they're the worst defense in terms against running backs, most rushing yards allowed, highest yards per carry to running backs this season. They lost Derek Brown in the first week of the season. They've never recovered. This front can be run on easily over and over again. That's a great spot for Bucky.
There's no question about it. It's a great spot for Bucky. It makes up for the fact that I don't have Ken Walker tonight against Big Show in our league finals. But I do have Bucky Irving this week, and I need him to carry the load. He's averaging in his last 4 games that he's been healthy, right? He's averaging over 20 touches a game. He's averaging over 135 yards from scrimmage. And it's a nice matchup with Carolina. You think about the first matchup when the Buccaneers played the Panthers. Irving had 185 yards from scrimmage. That was week 13. And so another heavy workload should come for Irving against Carolina. Running backs have seen at least 17 touches against the Panthers this year, averaging over 18 fantasy points per game. So, yeah, Bucky Irving to me is a top 12 play this week.
Yeah, Connor, you mentioned the Panthers allowing the most rushing yards to running backs this year. That's actually by a wide margin. The next worst team, I guess you could say, is 358 yards behind the Panthers. So they've allowed the most rushing yards to running backs. They've allowed the second most rushing touchdowns. I love Bucky Irving in this matchup, and I even like Rachaad White because they've been playing 50% of the snaps the past couple of games. So you love Bucky Irving, like Rachaad White too. It's just it happens every week. James Conner just rode them for 166 scrimmage yards last week. So it's almost inevitable. And like you said, they haven't recovered from losing Derek Brown early in the season.
How about some others receiving votes here, guys? Isaac Guerendo, we know that when he's healthy and without CMC, the rookie's been able to get enough work to be the guy over there. Alexander Madison, it's been a ping-pong backfield for the Raiders of guys being hurt, guys losing the job. Sincere McCormick comes out of nowhere, now he's hurt. And we're all the way full circle back to Alexander Madison. He just makes the top 20. Tajay Spears, who's taken on a large pass-catching role, especially Tony Pollard's been banged up with an ankle injury. He's got the Jacksonville matchup in the same game. Tank Bigsby makes the top 30. And then Matthew, Audric Estime makes the love list there, or at least others receiving votes. RB 34 against a rough Bengals front.
Yeah, your boy Audric Estime. This assumes Jaleel McLaughlin will be out again. But last week with McLaughlin out, 53% of the running back rushing share, his second highest this season. You like the matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals defense. And obviously the Broncos are playing to try to clinch a playoff spot. You mentioned Tajay Spears. He's outsnapped Tony Pollard in 2 straight games, playing 57% of the snaps, averaging over 24 fantasy points per game. Madison has a great matchup with the Saints. They've allowed 20 or more fantasy points to opposing running backs in 11 of their last 13 games. That game should be competitive, so I don't think they'll get, game scripted out. And again, him and Abdullah are really all they have. Usual caveats apply when you're talking about San Francisco running backs here, Connor. But Isaac Guerendo, again, assuming health, and I'm underlining assuming, but assuming health in his 2 games since CMC and Jordan Mason went on IR, he's averaging over 18 touches a game and basically an 11% target share. So the expectation here is that he is back healthy. Now it's the Monday night game. So, make sure you have a pivot and just follow that news closely. But it's a high game total against the Lions, whose defense has just been decimated by injuries.
Lawrence, can we actually find some usage finally out of this Raiders backfield? I know we've been low on Madison in the past, but this is a team that I think would like to run the football in a good matchup. And the fact is, a lot of the other guys are too banged up where they're out of his way for touches.
Yeah, it's crazy with the, you got Amir Abdullah, you got Alexander Madison, but now you're going up against the Saints team that's allowed they've allowed 20 or more fantasy points in 11 of their last 13 games. So like I said with Bucky Irving and Rachaad White just a few minutes ago, you kind of feel the same way here about Alexander Madison and Amir Abdullah going up against this Saints defense, who you just got a couple of teams, playing for or not playing for a draft position. The Raiders they're still trying to win. So definitely like Alexander Madison in this spot because of the matchup. And that's really where you look at it from.
Let's look at the hate list here, guys. We start with DeAndre Swift. Listen to this laundry list of bad nuggets here, Matthew. He's not scored double-digit fantasy points since week 11 in 4 of his last 5 games. He's been held to under 40 rushing yards. Oh, and in those 5 games, Matthew, he hasn't scored a touchdown.
Yeah, none of that's good, Connor. That's the opposite of good. That's hashtag bad. By the way, he's also not involved. And you're like, well, if he's not scoring touchdowns, is he involved in the passing game? And the answer is no. 7 straight games now with a target share below 9%. He's averaging basically 2 targets a game. Outside my top 20 tonight in a game in which the Bears are underdogs to Seattle.
I mean, Lawrence, look at this stat line here. It's nothing pretty for Swift. And to be fair, it's not like he's completely written off in the game plan. He's just not able to do much with it.
Yeah, I actually thought he could bounce back last week against the Lions defense, who, they're getting hurt more and more every week. They're losing guys in the front 7, which is pivotal. So I figured, hey, maybe and then you're looking at what James Cook did to them the week prior. I'm like, maybe DeAndre Swift could get back. He had 19 carries for 79 yards the week prior, and it just didn't happen. Like Matthew said, in these type of situations, you're hoping a guy like Swift, who can catch the ball out of the backfield, could get you some fantasy some fantasy production there, but it's just not happening. He had a good little stretch in the middle of the season where he was really coming on, but since week 10, he's been outside the top 24 running backs, and you wouldn't feel confident about this about anybody. I would even say if this was against the Panthers, who allow the most running backs, the most points to running backs, you would feel like, man, it's still a little shaky, so can't ride with Swift this week.
And Lawrence, we talked about Tajay Spears on others receiving votes for the love list. His teammate, his companion in that backfield, Tony Pollard, he makes the hate list. He's been dealing with an injury. And the bottom line is right now, Tajay Spears has outsnapped him in each of the past 2 games. I'm sure some of this is due to injury, but that's something that counts in fantasy right now.
Yeah, and it's not like Tajay Spears is doing it crazy in the run game. He's got 32 rushing yards in his last 2 games, but he's got 3 touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns. He's getting a lot of work in the receiving game. But then you look at the fact that this game between the Titans and the Jaguars, 39.5 over under, Connor. That's the second lowest of all of the week 17 games. So you're not really thinking that, we're going to get a lot of fantasy production out of this game outside of guys like Brian Thomas Jr., maybe Calvin Ridley if Mason Rudolph go deep with him a couple of times. But you're looking at Tajay Spears, more so than Pollard with that injury.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Look, I mean, here's the other concern, right? It's a game that we're not expecting a ton of points to be scored, right? It's a 39.5 over under. It's the second lowest on the week 17 slate. Titans have a bottom 7 implied team total, by the way. And for all the problems that the Jaguars have over the last month, they're actually top 12 in success rate against running back carries. Like, they actually play pretty decent run defense as well. So again, a lot of the reasons why I like Tajay Spears are the reasons that I don't like Tony Pollard this week. He's outside my top 20. As long as we're talking about this game, though, very quickly, I mentioned Tank Bigsby, or Connor, you did, that Tank Bigsby makes other receiving vote. We didn't really talk about that. It's just worth noting that Tennessee over the last month has allowed the most running back rushing touchdowns in the NFL. They're tied for the most. So we do like Bigsby, who's on the right side of that timeshare between him and Travis Etienne.
Also on the hate list here, Matthew, Rico Dowdle. Now, the good news for Rico Dowdle, something we've discussed a lot that's made him fantasy relevant during the stretch here, is that in his last 5 games, he's averaging over 19 carries in those games. The problem is it's hard to expect that to be effective this week because over the past 4 weeks, the Eagles are allowing a league-low 3.2 yards per carry.
Yeah, I mean, look, he doesn't really get a lot of opportunities in close. Now, it's gotten better recently as his workload has increased, but this entire year, Rico Dowdle has 6 goal-to-go rushing attempts. 6. There are 45 different running backs in the NFL with more goal line rush attempts than Rico Dowdle. And we know how good this defensive line is for the Philadelphia Eagles, right? They allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs over the last 4 weeks. And so Dowdle, who's not really involved in the passing game as much as we hoped he would, like, he sort of had that one breakout game. And you're like, is he going to be a big part of the passing game? Well, no. Week 10 was the last time he got a double-digit target share. Cooper Rush is actually looking more comfortable in this offense. He's throwing it down the field more, which is good for the Cowboys offense overall. Not great for Rico Dowdle, who I think is a risky flex play. I will say I'll feel better about Dowdle's prospects if Kenny Pickett is starting and Jalen Hurts is out, because I just think the Cowboys will be more competitive in this game and they'll be able to run it and control the clock more. But if Hurts is playing in this game a week after the Eagles lost that heartbreaker to the Commanders, I think Philadelphia has their way with the Cowboys.
Yeah, the thing about Rico Dowdle, you saw him he had been on a roll. He had 3 weeks where he had career high rushing yards every week. He ran into Tampa Bay. They're a good run defense, more so than they are on the pass defense. He had his lowest rushing yards total in 6 games, only at 23 yards. And then, Matthew, you alluded to this, he couldn't cash in on the goal line touchdown. They gave it to Ezekiel Elliott, who had barely played the whole game. So now you're going from Tampa Bay, who's one good run defense. Now you got an even better one in the Philadelphia Eagles, who have just a better defense overall. So when the matchup is not in Rico Dowdle's favor, I don't like him in my lineups as much as those previous weeks. It's like, because he was getting the volume, because he was getting, mid-level to good matchups, you loved putting him in there in your flex spot, but now you just can't feel that great about it. And I'm with you, Matthew, on the Kenny Pickett and Jalen Hurts, because with Jalen Hurts, you expect the Eagles to possess the ball a little more. So in that case, that's why, Rico Dowdle's on the hate list this week.
Let's move over to the pass catchers here, guys. And Matthew, we start with Davante Adams, who, if you don't believe there's a little milestone chasing right now between him and Aaron Rodgers, he's got almost a 33% target share over his past 4 games. And we've seen him get a lot of red zone looks from Rodgers in recent weeks as Rodgers is chasing that 500 touchdown.
Rodgers is chasing that. Rodgers is chasing a gig next year. So is Davante Adams, who wants to prove that he is still one of the elite wide receivers in the National Football League. And so you're right. Rodgers is looking for Adams early and often. And I mentioned the target share, not only because of, that's an obvious step to talk about, but also specifically to Buffalo. Because wide receivers that have seen at least 7 targets against the Bills this year are averaging 23.6 fantasy points per game. For as great as Josh Allen is and as brilliant as the Bills' offense is, their defense has struggled. Since week 10, no team in the NFL allows more fantasy points per game to opposing wide receiver. No team in the NFL allows more yards per game to opposing wide receivers, again, since week 10. And so they're just giving up a ton of fantasy points, yards, receptions. You pick a stat, and the Bills give it up to wide receivers. So massive target share for Davante Adams and a great matchup. I'm as a top 4 play this week.
Man, Matthew, I don't even think, let's be specific too, right? That massive target share is crazy. At least 11 targets in 6 out of his last 7 games. Aaron Rodgers don't care. Davante Adams is double covered, triple covered. He's throwing his boy the ball to the point where Garrett Wilson's like, hey, you got to ask them why I ain't getting the ball. Furthermore, he's went over 100 yards in 2 of his last 3 games. He scored a touchdown in 4 straight games. And like you said, the Bills defense on the back end, they haven't been able to cover anybody. So now you got Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers coming in, who literally is stat padding. He might be the most loviest of all the loves on this list this week, Matthew.
Well, Lawrence, not too far behind him, is a big love of this show, Brian Thomas Jr., where the rookie looked pretty good with Trevor Lawrence. With Mac Jones, he's looked unguardable. I mean, second most targets in the NFL over the past 4 weeks for BTJ.
Yeah, it's to the point where, this is just the type of talent that we can already see where it don't matter who his quarterback is, right? Like how DeAndre Hopkins was back in the day when he had 12 quarterbacks for the Houston Texans. He's that type of player. He had a season high 40% target share in his first matchup against the Titans. That was just a few weeks ago in week 14. So it wasn't like it was, week 2 or week 3. And we was worried about BTJ when Mac Jones first got in there, because he went through a little low for about 3 weeks. He wasn't doing so well, but he's back. He was wide open on his touchdown, but hey, whose fault is that for not covering the best receiver on the field? Gotta love BTJ this week, man.
Yeah, I would agree, Lawrence. Look, I'm as a top 6 play. Like, for all the things that have gone wrong in Jacksonville this year, Brian Thomas Jr. is one of the bright spots. I think one of the best wide receivers out of this rookie class, somebody that has just kind of exploded on both the NFL and the fantasy stage. First, Matt, think about week 14, which wasn't that long ago. Week 14, that was the first time the Jags played the Titans, and he had a 40% target share, right? We've talked about his target share quite a bit during this segment. Well, the reason I bring up the target share specifically is that since week 11, there have been 7 different wide receivers to see at least 8 targets against the Titans. 6 of them have scored 15 or more fantasy points. Titans bottom 6 in the NFL in terms of completion rate. Touchdowns allowed on deep passes. This is all again since week 11. So I think BTJ is in for a big game this week. He's an easy top 10 play for me.
Yeah, and Matthew, the same could be said for your boy, Terry McLaurin. I mean, it feels like over previous years, we know Terry was going to get his receptions, he was going to get his yards, but he's a guy traditionally that just doesn't score a lot of touchdowns. Well, welcome Jayden Daniels into town where McLaurin's already got 12 this year. And because of that, he's got almost 16 fantasy points in 9 of his past 10 games, averaging exactly 15.8. Fire up Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, I mean, Terry McLaurin has just sort of been unlocked by Jayden Daniels, and you couldn't ask for a better matchup in the fantasy finals than the Atlanta Falcons. Since week 9, Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons are allowing 41.1 fantasy points per game to wide receivers. That's most in the NFL. And in fact, during that stretch, Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons are allowing the most yards per game to perimeter wide receivers. It's worth noting that Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons are tied for the most touchdowns allowed to wide receivers this season. And McLaurin, of course, gets almost 50% of Washington's end zone targets. So they're looking for Scary Terry. And against the Falcons, Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons, I should clarify, they have a lot of success. They should have a lot of success like so many teams have this year. Lawrence, something to think about next year is maybe hiring a defensive-minded head coach.
Well, Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons might have something to say when they get down there to DC this weekend. We're going to see, but we'll save that for later in the weekend. Maybe we might have a little bet brewing, but I'm not going to disagree with you on the fact that I, too, love Terry McLaurin this week. Look, 7 touchdowns as a rookie, right? That was his career high. For the first time, he finally has double-digit touchdowns in a season, and that's thanks to the fact that he scored in 4 straight games. In three out of his last 4 games, he's got at least 73 receiving yards. He's less than 100 yards away from reaching a new career high. And you said it, key word, Jayden Daniels. That's what he needed. So now he's going to get that career high in receiving yards like he has it in touchdowns. So you can't, no matter who my team is, you can't not say that Terry McLaurin ain't been that one of them dudes this season.
Some others receiving votes here, guys. Of course, Lad McConkulis, Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen, Jalen McMillan, Chig Okonkwo. A theme with this list here, Matthew. A lot of these guys in recent weeks have become the go-to targets of their quarterbacks.
Yeah, and you see it on your screen there with the exception of McMillan. They're all slot guys. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of one of the new cheat codes of the NFL. I wouldn't say that new, but like we just see this, right? McConkey's had 5 straight games with 14 or more fantasy points with a 25% target share. So it's not fluky. You like the matchup against the Patriots. How about Keenan Allen? But I hope I'm wrong on this because I'm in a league where I played against Travis Kelce, Derrick Henry, and Lamar Jackson. I'm down by like 75 points. I haven't even had a player yet. And that the same guy that had those 3 also has Keenan Allen going tonight. So I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I will be. Since week 7, teams that face Seattle are averaging the 2nd most slot targets per game. Keenan Allen's been red hot. He's a top 20 play for me this week. Adam Thielen out of the slot. Tampa Bay allows the 3rd most yards to the slot this season. Thielen has 4 straight with a 24% target share or more. And McMillan, of course, the rookie coming on for Tampa Bay. He's had a 20% target share his last 3 games. He scored in each of those last 3 games. He's actually got 4 touchdowns in that stretch. And then my guy, Chig Okonkwo, it's weird, but over the last 2 weeks, Mason Rudolph seems to look for Chig Okonkwo and only Chig Okonkwo. 31% target share with Mason Rudolph under center. Nice matchup against the Jaguars, who since week 10 are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends.
Yeah, Matthew, you said, those first 3 guys, they devour the slot snaps. And even McMillan, even though he doesn't get majority, the last 2 weeks, he's at least gotten 24 snaps out of the slot. So he's getting some looks there. And that was really his best position in college. So we'll see how that goes. Lawrence, it's been interesting seeing him finally carve out a role in Baker Mayfield's passing attack because he looked so good this summer. It just took a couple injuries to get there.
He is coming along at just the right time because they need him, and he's been delivering. Like Matthew said, he scored in 3 straight games. I think right now, and I don't think it's a question now, especially with kind of Cade Otton kind of drifted away. He's their number 2 right now in the passing game. Take out the running backs. I would say it's Jalen McMillan. The Buccaneers need this win to stay alive in the NFC South race, and you can't can't just go to Mike Evans all the time. And when Baker Mayfield hasn't, he's looked towards Jalen McMillan, and he has delivered at least 6 targets in 3 straight games. And that's all you can really ask for when you're playing behind Mike Evans. Like, he's been more than solid during this small stretch to me.
We move over to the hate list here, guys. And back-to-back weeks, Jerry Jeudy, who might have got you to the playoffs once upon a time, but he makes the hate list again. Forget the fact that season-low 10% target share last week, Matthew. This isn't a functioning passing offense with the young quarterback and DTR under center. He had 42 dropbacks, but just 157 passing yards, 2 picks, no touchdowns. It's got to be hard to trust really any wide receiver in this offense right now.
Yeah, look, we've talked about this a lot. We talked about this last week about why Jerry Jeudy was on the hate list last week, as was Elijah Moore. And it got proven out this past week with DTR under center. Look, he's had 4 career starts, DTR has, right? And only once in those 4 starts has a wide receiver caught more than 4 passes or scored double-digit fantasy points. And the one that did was Elijah Moore, who scored 12. So not even Jerry Jeudy. It's the championship week. You don't want to get cute. I get it. He got you here, but I cannot imagine anything you saw last week from Jeudy or DTR gives you confidence to play him against Miami this week, who's been a better defense as of late. And obviously the Dolphins playing hard to try to keep their playoff hopes alive.
Lawrence, you sitting Jeudy in this spot?
Sitting?
Yeah.
If
Benching,
I'm in a redraft
dropping,
and I need a roster spot, I'm dropping Jeudy if I know that DTR is starting. He's up to, he has 1 touchdown pass in his career, 9 interceptions after week 16. You can't play no wide receiver like I would, like if he had a receiver like CeeDee Lamb, I would be starting him, but man, would I be hating it. I would be hating that. To go, like, Jerry Jeudy just had his worst game in his last 8 games. That's the last time he went under 20 receiving yards. And during that time, that's before Jerry Jeudy was what he eventually became, but with Jameis Winston. That's the key here, is Jameis Winston. So if it's DTR and you need a roster spot to pick up a defense or something like that, it don't have to be nothing major. I would drop Jeudy because if it's redraft, this the last week. You don't need him anymore.
Right.
So yeah.
All right, guys. Our next one, Calvin Ridley. He's also dealing with some quarterback issues. Over the past 4 weeks, Jacksonville's actually been okay against wide receivers. They're allowing the 7th fewest points per game to wide receivers. Some of that might be getting teams out of throw script. But Matthew, on top of that, Ridley just hasn't had any consistency under center, and that's led to very, very few red zone action as well.
He's been under 20% in terms of target share in 3 of the last 4 weeks. So you're right? Target share just really hasn't been there for Calvin Ridley. 14% target share the last 2 weeks, under 20%, as I said, in 3 of the last 4. And then you mentioned the scoring opportunities or the lack thereof, Connor. This entire year, Calvin Ridley has 3 end zone targets. 3. The entire season. There are 80 different wide receivers that have more end zone targets, 80, than Calvin Ridley. He's tied for 81st with 3 end zone targets. That's just, again, it just doesn't give you any sort of confidence getting in a fantasy finals to start Calvin Ridley unless you have to. He's a very shaky wide receiver 3 for me. I'm at wide receiver 29 this week.
In more of the Jacksonville's recent games, you said it, Connor, they've been good against receivers lately. The only guy recently who really had a good game against them was Davante Adams. So like you said, the quarterback shuffling is getting out of hand. There's really no consistency. He's had success with Mason Rudolph, and he's had success with Will Levis fantasy-wise, but he's also put up horrendous duds with both of those quarterbacks too. So now you feel a hell of a lot better with him than you do Jerry Jeudy. Let's put that out there. But still, it's not something you love going into the championship week if you have to roll with him in your lineup.
Our last pass catcher here, guys, Jameson Williams. Now, Lawrence, you were early on his breakout and all over it. He's been really, really good down this stretch. The only problem in this scenario, Lawrence, is that he's got the Niners. They've been the best against wide receivers this season in fantasy.
Yeah. Look, he's not a guy who gets a lot of targets out of the slot. That's reserved for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So that's what separates him from like really taking that next step. Now you look at it from the fact that the San Francisco 49ers have allowed the fewest receptions and yards on deep passes. What did we just see Jameson Williams do last week against the Bears? He caught a deep ball touchdown. So that part of the game may be limited. The Lions may look elsewhere to get their production, and we know the Lions can do that. They could do it through the run game. They could do it through the short passing game. They could do it in the play action passing game. So I wouldn't be as high as I usually am on Jameson Williams. And plus, they're on the road. He does better when they in that dome in Detroit.
Now, Matthew, you have him wide receiver 27, so he's in playable territory. It's just a little bit scarier and riskier this week.
For sure. I mean, listen, it's one of the highest over-unders on the slate. So, because we expect San Francisco to move the ball, given how bad the Lions defense has been recently. They're so beat up. So we think San Francisco will move the ball, which means Detroit's going to have to move the ball. And like their offense is playing at a super high level. The concern, again, is to just match up against the Niners, right? No team gives up less yards per game to perimeter wide receivers, which is where Williams obviously lines up. They've actually also allowed the fewest receptions and yards on deep passes. It's hard to beat them deep. So it just feels like on the road at San Francisco, the way Detroit tries to move the ball is running the ball with Gibbs, obviously, and just, Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the middle of the field. They'll take their shots with Williams, but I don't know. It's just risky. I feel like you're going to need to hit on one big one if you start Williams. I'm as a shaky wide receiver 3, as you mentioned, Connor, wide receiver 27 for me this week after the 4 teams from Wednesday have been removed.
All right, guys, we're going to take our first break. When we're back, love-hate continues. We got the quarterbacks right after this.
I'm sure you got tons of football gifts during this time of year. Anyone stand out to you or from as a kid?
Gift? I don't even know. I think I would remember around this time waking up tomorrow and watching NBA basketball. I mean, I know it's football on tomorrow, but I don't think anything could kind of replace what basketball brings to Christmas.
Love-hate pass catcher quarterbacks. That would be Jayden Daniels, by the way, on a little bit of a pivot there. Christmas Day to him is about the NBA, but the weekend after Christmas, guys, for us, is about Jayden Daniels, Matthew. He tops the love list. It's not rocket science here. He's got 29 points per game over his last 4. He's been a superstar in year 1.
When you do it against the Eagles, you can do it against almost any team at all. And certainly that includes Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons. Get this, Connor, since week 5, Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons, right? Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons have allowed the 5th highest passer rating. They've also allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. During that stretch, Lawrence Jackson's Atlanta Falcons are allowing touchdown passes at the highest rate in the National Football League. Again, Lawrence, I don't know why the Falcons went out this offseason and didn't acquire a defensive-minded head coach. Feels like that would have been something to focus on. You guys didn't want to do it. It is what it is. Anyway, I have Jayden Daniels. After Lamar has been removed from my ranks, Jayden Daniels is QB2 for me this week.
Oh, man, I don't even know if the Falcons should show up to play. It seemed like the Commanders, they've already won here, huh? I don't know.
Well, offensively, for sure. You're going to need Michael Penix Jr. to bring that big Penix energy. You're going to have the Commanders, get some Penix envy if you want a chance in this game, Lawrence. Yes.
Look, Jayden Daniels, past 4 games, multiple touchdown passes, at least 200 passing yards. And you'll say, oh, well, that's 200 passing yards. That's nothing. Well, 3 out of his last 4 games, he's rushed for at least 65 yards. So he's going to give you the production there. And this is true, Matthew. You could do it against the Eagles. You damn sure could do it against the Atlanta Falcons. So I don't think it's any reason not to love Jayden Daniels any week. Not 3 weeks ago, not 8 weeks ago, and certainly not now after you saw what he was able to do after throwing 2 interceptions against the Eagles. The last interception should have put them out the game, but no. Jayden Daniels said, no, this is my time to shine. And I think he gets the big stage here on NBC Sunday night, and it's a chance for him to do it again. We love it.
Jayden Daniels, not a surprise on the love list, but how about Brock Purdy cracking into the top 5 quarterbacks, guys? And with this one, listen, over the past 4 weeks, Detroit is allowing a league-high 26.2 points per game to quarterbacks. When you look at their IR list right now on defense, it's bigger than their practice squad, Matthew. They are running out of bodies in Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, like they're so beat up, and we referenced this earlier in the show. It's like it's a high over/under, right? It's north of 50 this week, and part of it is again because we think 2 good offenses against 2 defenses. I mean, the Niners defense has been getting better, but the Lions, they're beat up over the last month. They're 30th in pass defense since week 13. They're just 19th in pressure rate, so they're not getting home. And by the way, this is what's crazy. They're 19th in pressure rate, but they have the 3rd highest blitz rate. I mean, so they're trying to bring pressure and they just can't get home as well. And so given the high over under nature of this game, how beat up the Lions are specifically in the secondary and the question marks around the Niners running backs. I do like Garendo if he's healthy, but I think this is a big Brock Purdy game. I think, Kittle, Jennings, even Debo have good games against the Lions in one of the highest scoring one of the highest scoring games on the slate in week 17. At the moment, it's 50.5, which is the highest on DraftKings.
Purdy in the top 5. Lawrence, how about Bo Nix sneaking into the top 10? And for good reason here. The second half of the season, the Bengals are allowing the 2nd most points per game to quarterbacks.
Yeah, you said it. We're going against the Bengals here, who've allowed the 4th most yards per pass attempt to quarterbacks. And now we know Bo Nix can get it done with his legs, but he's shown in games here and there this season, throughout the course of this season, that when there's a solid matchup, he can get it done through the air as well. So another big game here for both Cincinnati and the Broncos. And when you look at the Bengals on the other side of things, you have the Bengals who have one of the best offenses in the league with one of the best quarterbacks, and who is playing like a receiver who's playing like the best wide receiver. They're gonna score. There's no doubt about whether or not the Bengals are gonna score. It took them a little while last week against the Browns, but they eventually got it going. So the Broncos are gonna have to keep up with that. I expect Bo Nix to having to throw more. He'll be scrambling, he'll be throwing. So it's nice to have him on the love list this week for that reason.
Some others receiving votes here, Matthew. Justin Herbert's got the Patriots. Anthony Richardson has the Giants. For that reason, both guys make the top 12 out of QBs. And then right inside the top 20 is an improving Bryce Young, Matthew. He's got that Bucs secondary that's really struggled all season.
Yeah, they're 30th in pass defense this year. They've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And very quietly, since the Week 11 bye, Bryce Young is averaging over 18 fantasy points per game in those 5 weeks since coming out of the bye. I think he's very viable in 2 quarterback leagues this week.
Let's look at the hate list, guys. This is headlined by Tua Tagovailoa. Lawrence, the formula has been pretty simple with Tua, when to kind of doubt him or get nervous. On the road this season, he's averaging under 14 points per game.
Yeah, and you saw last week against the 49ers, their running game got going again for the Dolphins. So if you can, especially in a game where it's going to be a bad game environment, the over-under's 40, that's the 3rd lowest, which is actually weird for a game with the Dolphins offense, but that mostly has to do with the Browns offense. They're simply just trying to win this game. And when you're out there in Cleveland this time of the year, you want that run game to get going. Achane did exactly that last week. So I expect them to kind of lean more on that. They'll obviously pass the ball, but you got Jalen Waddle still banged up. You only got Tyreek Hill out there. You'll have Jonnu Smith over the middle. I don't foresee one of those 350-yard, 4-touchdown games just on game environment alone for Tua.
Yeah, looking ahead in Cleveland for that day, it's expected to be around 50 degrees, but most likely going to rain. So like you said, Lawrence, the environment not ideal for Tua or either offense, really, Matthew. And then Jordan Love is also on the hate list. He just sneaks inside the top 20 quarterbacks at quarterback 18. Here's the thing, Matthew, that's been very sneaky with Jordan Love. In fantasy, we expect him to be a gunslinger, to throw it. Since week 9, he doesn't have a game with more than 28 pass attempts.
Yeah, they've gone run heavy recently, and it's been working for the Packers. So why would they go against that? It's worth noting that Jordan Love is 19th in fantasy points per pass attempt against the blitz. Okay, he's 19th in fantasy points per attempt against the blitz. And I mention that because no team in the NFL has a higher blitz rate than the Minnesota Vikings. By the way, Vikings defense playing very well recently. Last 4 weeks, they're giving up touchdown passes at the 3rd lowest rate. They give up the 5th fewest fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So I'm nervous about Love in this game because of lack of volume, and he's bad against the blitz and how well the Vikings defense is playing. If there's something to hang your hat on, if you're forced to start Jordan Love, and like I'm in a finals where I might have to because Jalen Hurts might not play this week, right? Worth noting the Eagles very quickly, the Eagles signing Ian Book to the practice squad. So maybe that's a sign that, hey, they're nervous about Hurts' availability. So if there's something to sort of try to talk yourself into Jordan Love, which I'm trying to do, it's this. The last time he played the Vikings, that was way back in week 4, but the last time he played the Vikings, 339 yards, 4 touchdowns. He had a monster fantasy day. He also threw 3 picks. And again, Love and the Packers offense playing much differently, and the Vikings defense playing better than it was week 4, but at least it's a high over-under total. So, there's some signs of positivity, but I have Jordan Love outside my top 15 this week because of concerns of volume and pressures against the blitz.
Let's take a look at who's eating good, of course, served by Applebee's, and it was a buffet for these guys on Christmas Day. Notably, Lamar Jackson, Lawrence, who all of a sudden is plus 135 to win the MVP over 29 fantasy points. A massive day for Lamar, who, Lawrence, out of nowhere, is giving Josh Allen a good run for his money.
Yeah, man. He came to play. I think when you look at his season in totality, it's kind of always why Lamar stayed in the rear view with the betting odds. It wasn't as close as it is now, but he was the clear second guy. And I think Josh Allen, with those 2 games against the Rams and the Lions, that's what kind of separated them. But Lamar Jackson just kept on, chugging along. And now here we are close. And I think to get Lamar at plus money, even right now, there's some books that still have him at plus 300 if you want to take that shot there. For Josh Allen, it's going to be, he's playing the Jets. So it's like, if he has a great game, it's against the Jets. No matter what, though, you still have to go out there and have that great game. He can't play like he played against the Patriots because that's part of what allowed Lamar Jackson to really get back into this, according to the betting odds. So it's going to come down to the wire. That number jumped significantly. That number for Lamar was plus 400 before that Christmas Day game. And like you said, now at plus 135, as of today, when it comes to betting, they're basically even.
The Ravens with a blowout win over the Texans, and Matthew on the other side, the Chiefs with more of the same against the Steelers. Very quietly, Patrick Mahomes with back-to-back games of 23-plus points here, Matthew.
Yeah, only had 2 20-point games all season before that, but maybe the emergence of Xavier Worthy as a legitimate threat, who Worthy on his own, by the way, 21 fantasy points over the past 3 games. That's what he's averaging. He's got almost a 27% target share. He's gotten at least 9 touches in 3 straight games. So the emergence of Xavier Worthy, maybe the addition of Hollywood Brown coming back, and just maybe them trying to find their way, right? But it's really great to see that Mahomes finally looking like Patrick Mahomes here towards the end of the season. I think you think about next year, Mahomes is probably going to be ranked lower than he ever has been as a quarterback. He's probably going to be somewhere in that 7 to 10 range, I think. But Worthy has become Worthy as we head here late in the season. He's kind of having, again, it's an easy comparison, but it's not a totally incorrect one, which is, similar to Rashee Rice last year, right? They're obviously different players, different roles in the offense. And Xavier Worthy would be the greatest wide receiver in Canadian Football League history if he could play in the CFL, because he seems like he needs that one extra yard on the sideline all the time. But Worthy has played very well recently, so it was for those that have been hanging on to him all season long. He paid off in the fantasy finals.
We're going to take our last break here. When we're back, we got our favorite bets for Thursday Night Football. Last call is next. DraftKings Sportsbook is the #1 place to bet touchdowns, and new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Download the app and use promo code Barry when you sign up. DraftKings Sportsbook, the crown is yours. There it is. It's time for last call. Let's take a look at the most bet player props for Thursday Night Football. Seattle traveling to Chicago to take on the Bears, where the Bears right now are 4.5-point underdogs. Here's what the public likes. Guys, for me, I like the script of Seattle running. I'm going Zach Charbonnet over 68.5 rushing yards. And as we've seen so many times in the second half of Bears games, Caleb Williams has to throw a lot. I like him going over his 218.5 passing yards. Lawrence, what are you looking at in this game?
I'm going DJ Moore and DK Metcalf to combine for 150 receiving yards at plus 150. I'm simply taking two guys who could get 75 yards each on a single play. DK Metcalf hasn't done this since week 4, and DJ Moore hasn't done it in 5 weeks, but both of them are finally starting to get their targets, especially DK. So I'm rolling with that. That's a good price for those two receivers.
Matthew, what about you?
You know what? I'm taking Caleb Williams under 0.5 interceptions. I don't think he throws a pick in this game. Listen, he hasn't thrown an interception since week 6. He's got the 3rd lowest interception rate among all starting quarterbacks this season. He's on his way towards a record, by the way. And 4 of the 5 interceptions that Caleb Williams has actually thrown this year have all come on the road. He's only thrown 1 interception at home this entire season. So I like these kind of bets because, you know what, basically you're winning. And something has to happen for you to lose the bet. But when the game starts, you're winning the bet. It's under 0.5 interceptions for Caleb Williams. It's only minus 110 as well at DraftKings.
Let's quickly take a look at your top-ranked players, Matthew, for the matchup. Of course, both quarterbacks make it into the top 20. Zach Charbonnet, the real star in this game, as a top 10 ranking.
Yeah, the quarterbacks are all just mid-tier guys, but we like all the wide receivers. It's top 20 plays. JSN, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and of course, Adunze and Metcalf are risky flexes. We'll see you tomorrow. It's closing time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. For Connor Lawrence, I'm Matthew. Peace out.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and RotoWorld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest RotoWorld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.